So welcome everyone tonight to Friends of Shades Creek. After the summer, we don't meet in June and July, but we're here now in August, and we have 10 programs every year. So this is sort of the first of that year of programs. And we have a very special guest tonight, and I'm going to let one of our board members, Amy Milam, introduce our speaker for us.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. So we're joined tonight by Dr. Rick Cybulsky, who is a transplant from Manitoba, actually, Winnipeg, Manitoba, to be specific. But you're pretty much a Birmingham native now. You've been here since 1977, led a private practice here at Brookwood Hospital, and then retired in 2014. So I think that you're a Southern boy now. And you must have liked it because you stayed.
Yes.
Yeah, good. Well, in 2015, just the year after Rick retired, he went into the Master Gardner program, which is run out of the Birmingham Botanical Gardens here in Birmingham. It's a 6-month, is it 6-month program? It starts in February. No, it's not quite even 6 months. February, March, April. It's around 4 months, I guess, but then accruing all your volunteer hours takes longer too. But that's a great program if anybody's interested to learn more. Rick or I can talk about that too. But he did that in 2015. Apologies, my dog is about to start barking. Hey, Brett, can you get the dog? Sorry, y'all. And then recently just got his advanced Master Gardner certificate, which means that he had to sort of pick a topic and specialize in that topic in his studies. And he chose butterflies. He also had his native plant certificate. Now, Rick, did you do your native plant certificate under John Mannion?
I did. I did it under John Mannion.
Yeah, he was quite a local celebrity too, but just moved to Tennessee. So
Tremendous program.
And so Rick is here to talk to us today about the studies that he just completed for the Advanced Master Gardner certificate in butterflies. So I guess, did I leave anything else out, Rick, or did you want to talk about yourself a little bit first?
Well, let me
think about Birmingham.
I probably will. Let me get the slideshow started, and then I can do that as I go along. So
and I'll just remind everybody to, stay muted. I put it in the chat window too, but just make sure you keep yourselves muted. And as Rick is doing his presentation, I would ask you to just stay muted. But if you have questions, please type them in the chat window, and Michelle and I will be watching that. So we'll make sure at the end that he gets all of your questions. So thank you guys. Okay. All right, it's all yours.
I can't get it to do what I wanted it to do, but I'm gonna start in this fashion. Can you hear me all right? Okay. All right. So as Amy told you, I'm a transplant. I came from Canada in 1977. I was a practicing physician here for many years until 2014. And then back in Canada, I grew up on a farm, and I was always sort of a country boy and enjoyed plants and growing things. And I just had a great outdoor experience, but I spent most of my life, my working life was an indoor thing. I spent many, many hours inside the confines of a hospital. But after I was done, I knew about the Master Gardner program, and I wanted to participate in it. And I did so, and I did that. And then I was kind of always wanting another mountain to climb, I guess. And the native plant program was there with John Mannion, and I got to know him through the Master Gardeners program. And so I did that, completed that. And then a year or so ago, I became aware of this Advanced Master Gardener program. And I had recently read Doug Tallamy's book, which is Bringing Nature Home. I'm sure many of you have read it. And it inspired me because in there, he kind of has a formula for what we personally can do to try to improve the environment around ourselves and in our homes and yards. So that led me to the butterfly program. So what I'm going to do for you is we're going to talk about butterflies of Alabama. We're going to talk a little bit about what their growth cycle is like. And we're going to talk about some of the differences between host plants and nectar plants. And then maybe we can talk a little bit too about what are the kind of plants that we can have in our own yards to encourage more butterflies to come. Now here in August, this is a great time to see butterflies. The weather is warm, the earth has been blooming, there are many butterflies to be able to see, but maybe there's not as many as there should be. So obviously butterflies are beautiful, and here we're looking at the signature monarch butterfly, and it's on a butterfly milkweed, the tuberosa, and that is its host plant. The monarch is beautiful, but it has one defect, and that defect is it only has one host plant, and that host plant is sometimes under attack. Now, much more common to be able to see is the tiger swallowtail. And by the way, this is the butterfly of Alabama. And I think I'll go into some detail perhaps a little later as to why it is so common. Here, this is in my own yard on this liatris, and that butterfly worked that particular flower. Now, butterfly numbers in general are decreasing. Studies definitely prove it. And the monarch butterfly itself, a couple of years ago, was considered to be a species at risk. Now, why is it declining? There are several reasons why it might be, but it's such a dramatic drop, 80% drop estimated across North America, that there is the monarch joint venture that you may or may not be aware of, which is a large group of from different backgrounds, trying to see what's causing something that they could do about it. The Monarch Joint Venture Program, which you can find online. So obviously the most important thing is habitat loss. And in urban areas, we see that, we know about that. I mean, houses, streets, parking lots, shopping centers, etc. They take away our natural wild habitat. And even in rural areas, there is fragmentation as well. Some of it has to do with mowing of roadways and spraying insecticides and herbicides. And the main loss has been the milkweed. Now, really, there are remarkably few native plant communities in North America. And this, all of this change has happened slowly over time. And in fact, certainly in urban areas, most of our locations are dominated by non-native plants. I've read where there may be as much as 70% non-native plants in certain urban areas, which is not conducive to the growth of those things that evolved here and that are dependent on that native habitat. So what can we do? We know the numbers are decreasing. We know that there are some factors that we've identified. Well, first of all, we can look at our own landscape. So here on the left, we can see what probably can look like the typical American home. We can see the landscaping that is along the house, and we can see the big expanse of lawn. I could show you other photographs more dramatically exhibiting that. And I don't know about your neighborhood, but when I see new houses going up in my neighborhood, I often see the trees going down along with it, which we'll mention is a major blow against butterflies. So what about if you chose instead to have your home look more like that on the right, where there are a carefully considered selection of plants that are more suitable for butterflies and other wildlife in our yards. So this is a true fact. By the plants I choose to grow, I can help butterflies and other pollinators and invertebrates to proliferate. That's insects. Insects are the major food source for the birds. And of course, those plants are what the butterflies need. Another true fact, by nurturing, enriching, and diversifying your own habitat at home, you can take part in butterfly conservation, and you might not be able to influence many endangered species directly, but you can at least play a part in some of the more common and widespread varieties. This was kind of Doug Tallamy's message. So even a small yard with just a few natives can do wonders, and even a patio with containers planted with host and nectar plants can make a difference. We'll get into more detail and define those host and nectar plants. I became aware of this useful tool here just the other day. Amy and I at the Master Gardeners Association meeting had a wonderful talk with Sims Johnson, and he pointed out this website. It's the National Wildlife Federation. There is no app yet for your phone, but probably there will be soon. But if you go to the website, you'll see this, and I draw your attention to those icons that you see. With one, you can find the native, you enter your own zip code, and with one of the icons, you can find the native plants that are in your area. And then with that next icon, you can find the butterflies which are in your area as well. And it identifies which of the native plants are host plants for that butterfly. And even when you look at the native plants, it tells you how many butterflies are hosted by those plants. So it's a great tool. The butterflies are a food source. Well, fascinatingly, birds that eat caterpillars, and as I mentioned, insects are probably 90% or more of the diet of birds. And this interesting little fun fact that it takes 7,500 caterpillars to raise one clutch of bluebird young. Those pair of bluebirds do a lot of work in order to raise that pair of bluebirds, and we need to help them along. Now, birds eat butterflies, and here's a flycatcher with the yellow swallowtail. So what's our goal? So we want to put host plants in our landscape upon which butterflies will lay their eggs, so that these plants in turn will be consumed by the hatching caterpillars. And the caterpillars are the eating machines, which, given the opportunity, will develop into the butterflies that we love to see. So if enough people took action to plant flowers, provide host plants, and offer overwintering areas, the butterflies in our area would enjoy a better future. So butterflies are pollinators as well. They may not be as efficient as bees, but they are certainly more beautiful. So I'm going to spend just a little bit of time on the butterfly life cycle. But first, I'll give you a little scientific information. So butterflies are in the order Lepidoptera, and that name is derived because of their color. Their color that we see, actually, you see this micrograph, which shows these little scales, and each are an individual color. And those individual colors are what we see as the color of a butterfly. When you were to pick up a butterfly and you notice that little dust that gets on your fingers, that is actually the scales of the butterfly. Now, the tragic thing is that the butterfly cannot regenerate those scales. So once it loses some of them, they do not grow back. But there's such an excess that they're able to sustain those losses and still be able to go about their business. So here we are. The butterfly lays the eggs on the host plant. The larva hatches. It starts eating. Eventually, it goes through several generations, and it will then attach itself either to the host plant or something nearby, the monarch caterpillar can actually travel up to 30 feet before it is going to find the place where it will then pupate and develop the chrysalis. And then from that point, eventually over the next 10 to 14 days, go through that metamorphosis, which turns it into the butterfly that we're all familiar with. Now, here is the monarch, and it's on the host plant, which is the milkweed. And notice how that milkweed seed pod kind of has the look of an okra. There are many different sorts of milkweed. The two varieties that we talked about here earlier, one is that orange butterfly milkweed, and that is the genus of that is Asclepius, and the specific name is tuberosa. But there's also common in our area what's called a swamp milkweed, which is also obviously the Asclepius, but it's the incarnata if you're looking for those two. So those eggs are small, and they initially are white in color, but as it matures, the color begins to change. And in 6 days from the time they are laid, they hatch. Here's numerous types of different butterfly eggs. As you can see here, they may be in single or they may be in clusters. Now the caterpillar itself, remember that butterflies are insects, and so insects have 3 body sections. First section of the head, the second section the thorax, and the latter section the abdomen. The head, even on the caterpillar, does have some eyes. They are rudimentary. The legs are on the thorax, and there is generally 3 pairs of legs. And then on the abdominal portion, there is other leg-like structures, but they're called prolegs. Now, the caterpillar is an eating machine, and it eventually outgrows its skin. And then what happens is, for a short period of time, that caterpillar becomes more or less stationary, and that outer skin or cuticle will harden and split. And after it splits, a new caterpillar emerges. In most butterfly species, that the caterpillar stage happens 5 different times. And each of those stages is called an instar. So that is another interesting word. The caterpillar has near the jaws a small other glandular structure from which a silky-like substance can be secreted. And it can use that to attach itself to branches, which it sometimes does when it tries to escape. And it also does when it's attaching itself to a twig or a branch when it's going to form the chrysalis. So eventually, after that 5th or the ultimate stage, it attaches itself then, and once that final skin or cuticle is split off, what's underneath is, in the case of the monarch, this green casing, which is called a chrysalis. And if you follow that over time, you'll see eventually it darkens, and in the last day or so, you can begin to see the butterfly within it. And when that cracks open, the butterfly emerges, but when it does, it's sort of weak and it's crumpled and it's wet. And it will then perch on that chrysalis as it comes out until it dries. And as it warms, the blood-like substance within the butterfly begins to flow. It's called hemolymph. And then soon thereafter, when it's no longer vulnerable to predators, it will fly, and within 4 to 5 days, it reaches its adult stage, and can then lay eggs on its own. It's sexually mature within 4 to 5 days. Here you can see some different varieties of chrysalis and what they may look like. I think the one on the lower left is the most intriguing to me, and that's actually a pipe vine swallowtail. Butterfly here, we see this with the head and the thorax and abdomen displayed. Notice that there's actually 2 pairs of wings, four wings and hind wings. The antenna is particular on a butterfly. You'll see the knobs on the end, and these are sensors that are both pheromone sensors and also the smell sensors. The proboscis is actually the way that the butterfly is able to drink the nectar when it comes to it. As I'll point out later, the proboscis is not a simple tube, it's actually 2 structures. Also notable on the butterflies is 2 compound eyes. A little bit more to be said about that in just a minute. Now the abdomen not only contains the gut, but it's also where the male and female organs are. And it's also where these spiracles are, and those are the organs of respiration. No lungs in a butterfly. The legs are very distinctive. Here on the monarch, the front legs actually have some needle-like structures, which allows the butterfly to pierce the leaf or stem of the plant upon which it is landed. And when it does so, then the taste sensors, which are on the bottoms of the other 4 legs, can actually taste the secretion that comes out of the plant. And that's how it tells that it's on the proper host plant. It's not until then that it will lay its eggs. It has to know that it's on the correct plant. And that's how it goes about doing that. Now here's the head itself. The prominent structure we're looking at here is the proboscis. And it varies in length from one butterfly type to another. Those butterflies that like the more tubular flowers will obviously have a long proboscis, and those that prefer the shorter flowers, it'll be shorter. So, as I said, this is not tubular. There's actually 2 lengths C-shaped, so that if it gets stuck from nectar, it can unwrap the 2 halves and clear that out and reattach it. So it's a very functional organ. The antennae have numerous sensors upon them, and they are both sensitive to sexual pheromones and also to the odor of honey in the nectar that they're looking for. Interesting trait of butterflies is this characteristic called aposematism. Think about it as kind of mimicry. The monarch butterfly is known to have a very bitter taste, and it can also be toxic because of the compounds that are within it. But notice how the viceroy butterfly looks very similar to it, but yet it does not have any of that bitter taste. So it has evolved to take advantage of the fact that birds and other predators find the monarch distasteful and will tend to ignore the viceroy as a consequence. And the same is true, I've shown you here, the pipevine swallowtail, which also has a very bitter taste to it because of its host plant. And the red spotted purple looks very similar to it, maybe not in this picture, but they do in other pictures that you will see and in the wild that you'll see. But yet the purple does not carry that kind of bitterness. It's just using that to its advantage. The other interesting characteristic of butterflies is puddling. It appears that butterflies will gather extra minerals and vitamins through this behavior, And it appears that these nutrients in the males can be transferred to the female, and it improves the viabilities of the eggs, and also then what's passed on into that next generation. So a host plant is the one upon which eggs are laid, and it provides the food source for the emerging caterpillar. The nectar plant is the source of food for the adult butterfly. And the host plants and the matching butterfly have evolved over time together. Now, don't think that plants and insects and butterfly caterpillars are friendly to each other. The plant has gone through a lot of stages to try to make itself unpalatable to the insects and the caterpillars. But what has happened too is that the insects over time, and the butterfly and caterpillars being one, have evolved in such a way that they are able to tolerate these toxins and alkaloids and tannins that are in those plants, so that they can use them. They even have mechanisms in which they can sequester these toxic compounds, and the predators know it when they see them. So obviously this is a relationship that's taken a great deal of time. So let's look at some of the butterflies that are in Alabama. We know, based on the work of Sarah Bright and Paulette Ogard, we can name 84 butterflies that in Alabama will lay eggs and use host plants and have caterpillars emerge so they can complete their cycle. 84 different. So here's the swallowtails. Here's the pipevine swallowtail. And here's its host plant, the Dutchman's pipe. It can also be seen on some other plants, but this is its main one. And the characteristic of that plant is there is this toxic compound, aristolochic acid, which is within it, to which the caterpillar has a natural defense mechanism. Here's our eastern tiger swallowtail. Most importantly about the swallowtail is that it uses as a host plant many of our local trees. In fact, there's dozens of trees, the leaves of those trees that this butterfly is able to use as a host plant. Not least of which is the tulip poplar, the sweet bay magnolias, black cherry, ashes. Here's a tulip poplar in bloom for us to identify. The male is the yellow one, the female is the black one. There's the egg. Notice that its caterpillar has that kind of bright green color, and that makes it kind of look like a snake, which evidently is another protective mechanism for it. The zebra swallowtail is really beautiful. It has a short proboscis, so therefore it needs short tube flowers like blueberries, blackberries, and the milkweeds. And this is its host plant, the pawpaw. Plant one, let's see that zebra swallowtail. The sulfurs and whites, I'm going to show you a couple of those. The sleepy orange. It's not, the dots on its wings look like the sleepy eyes, and thus its name. And here's a couple of its host plants: coffee weed, sicklepod, partridge pea. Here's a southern dogface. It's on a milkweed. That's the tuberosa milkweed. Some people think that the markings look like schnauzers. Others think it looks like poodle. But it's really hard to notice that because, as most butterflies, as you know, they like to be with the wings erect. And those eyes you only see when the wings are open and they are perched in an open manner, which they don't often do. This is its host plant, the prairie clover, which is, that is more native to the central part of Alabama. So we don't see the southern dogface as much here in Jefferson County. Gossamer wings, the most common of that is the gray hair streak. Now it's known as a habitat generalist, so it can be seen widely and is felt that it is present in every county in Alabama. It's a beautiful gray color when you see them, and the orange is pretty striking. And here we can see its host plant, the partridge pea, as well. Closely related to that is the banded hair streak. And I show it to you in particular because of this interesting thing that its host plant is oaks and hickories. And the other interesting thing about this particular butterfly is that, unlike the description I gave you earlier about butterflies that have several life cycles, this butterfly has only one life cycle per year. So it only flies once. So that term is univoltine. And that tends to coincide with when the butterfly milkweeds are blooming, because it uses it a lot as a nectar source. The brushfoots, hackberry emperor, it also has a short proboscis and tends not to nectar with flowers. It tends to prefer sap or rotting fruit, or even the damp dirt nearby. Plant is obviously the hackberry, and the hackberry is a host to 6 other species. So this plant, which is really common in our area, is a good source for host plant. Now here's our monarch, and it's kind of our signature butterfly. And as I mentioned, its defect is it only has that one host plant, which is in danger. The interesting thing about the monarch is that it tends to winter in Mexico. So in the central part of the country, it tends to gradually make its way into the forests of Mexico, where it overwinters. And as it gets closer there, each new generation becomes more and more able to be able to tolerate that colder weather. And then when the warm weather comes, it can begin to fly north, where it finds milkweeds blooming in southern parts of Texas. And a new generation is then born. And these are the ones, each generation gradually goes further and further north. In our part of the country, they tend to be along the Appalachians, and it is known that many of them overwinter in our area around Gulf Shores and Fort Morgan. So they don't overwinter in Mexico like those in the Central Plains do. Its host plant is the Asclepias tuberosa and other species. And the interesting thing about those milkweeds is that these are the compounds that contains these cardenolides and cardiac glycosides, which in vertebrates can be deadly, leading to congestive heart failure and death. So that's pretty remarkable that that plant, that caterpillar and butterfly has adapted itself to be using that as the host. Here's the American lady, another beautiful looking butterfly, and it is widespread in Alabama. Its host plant are plants that we find in grassy wild areas, the pussy toes and cudweed. I'm going to mention skippers, even though Bright and Goddard were not wanting to include skippers in the same category as other butterflies. They're worth mentioning because we do see a lot of them in our area. In particular, this one, the silver spotted skipper. You will note about them is they're very rapid flyers. So if you see one, when it takes off, it's hard to keep your eye on them. They're so quick. And there is kind of a drum beat from the wings as they fly off. They can fly straight and they can fly quickly, unlike other butterflies. They tend not to flutter. And it's felt that this is because they have superior eyesight. Their compound eyes are more, have more capability than those of the other butterflies. This is their host plant, but they also have been seen in Alabama to use as host plants kudzu and the Chinese wisteria that we see in so many places. So what do butterflies need? They need larval host plants that are available to them and some that we can provide in our own neighborhoods. Of course, they need nectar plants and they need a place of shelter. Some plants, some butterflies are generalists, others are specialists. The more specialized they become, the more likely that they may get danger if that plant is not as easily available. And that's the issue with the monarch. So here we see the butterfly milkweed, Asclepias tuberosa, the host plant for the monarch. It's not the only, this is not its only nectar source. There are numerous other nectar sources as well. But many butterflies do use this milkweed as a nectar source. Here's another interesting host plant, Golden Alexander, the black swallowtail. Here's another, a sunflower, the tiger swallowtail that we know is so capable with the trees of Alabama. But here's another source for them, the sunflower. Let me go back and restate. I'm sorry. It's the American lady is the host plant for this plant. I'm showing you this because the eastern tiger swallowtail is using it as a nectar source. This is an important concept, keystone plants. These trees I've listed here, this genus of trees, each provide incredible amount of opportunity for both moths and butterflies to use as host plant. So if you have any of these trees in your yard or nearby, you're providing a tremendous source of capability of reproduction for the butterfly. I've shown you the number of species that seem to be available for each of them. Not all of them in our area, but the oak in our area provides an opportunity for up to 360 different species of butterfly and moth to use as a host plant. So trees are exceedingly important. Now here's a list of nectar plants. And here are some of them. We've seen the liatris earlier. And we shouldn't forget about the grasses and the sedges, because they provide many of them can be sites where these insects overwinter, and they provide them shelter during storms, and there are also sites where they can pupate. And then as far as our gardens are concerned, they're good for times when we have drought, and they're also effective erosion control. So if you plant, they will come. We shouldn't plant just annuals in our yard. We should choose perennials, and we should think also about host plants, as we've been discussing. Herbs, and you can grow these in containers on your deck or around your home, and many butterflies use them as sources. And here we see the tiger swallowtail. Of course, if you grow that dill, don't expect to have it left. If that caterpillar finds it, they can decimate it. And what about shelter? Well, butterflies and caterpillars, and those chrysalids that can survive the winter, brush piles, bark of trees, tussocks of grass, leaf litter, these are the places where they can hide out. So we should provide some of that within our own yards and habitat as well. And then finally, I'm showing you this watercolor that a friend of mine did from that original of the monarch and on this Tithonia. So bringing nature home, we can all do our part, and I hope you're inspired. I'm sorry I couldn't get the other feature to come up, but that's it.
That was really great. Thank you so much for that. Gosh, I knew there were a lot of butterflies, and I knew that there were a lot of generalists, and that there were also a lot of plants that were important to all butterflies, but I don't think I've ever seen it quantified quite like that before. I've seen most of those in Sims Gardens, actually, not the American lady I don't think I've seen, and the zebra I don't think I've seen, which I'm excited about because I have some young pawpaw trees.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'll get some of those. I do have a couple questions in the chat box for you. How many generations does it typically take monarchs to migrate to and from Mexico?
Well, I mentioned about the instars and how that goes about happening. So we got to go all the way from the egg up to the butterfly before it can start to migrate. And how far do they fly? I think it takes at most of all of one season before that butterfly can get to its northern destination. So I think it's estimated that 10 to 14 generations for it to get, let's say, to the northern plains. So that's a good bit.
Wow.
So those areas are not, whereas February and March, butterflies can be seen in the southern part of Texas. And by the time that each of those generations make their ascent and gradually move further and further north, that's going to be until well into the summer before they get well up north. So it's a long journey.
Thank you. You mentioned puddling, and actually that was something I was going to ask you about too. And you said that they do that for minerals. Do we know if they're doing that to get water too, or if it's just minerals, and how do they know? I mean, because how many of us have seen them at a gas station on the side of I-65 where there's a nasty puddle and there's a bunch of butterflies around it, or I've even seen them kind of hovering around the feces of other animals. So
Yes.
I mean, that's so weird. Why do we know why, like, and when they do that, or is that still sort of a mystery?
I mentioned that evidently there are some minerals required to be able to strengthen the egg, and the males harvest this, and those minerals are then deposited in the spermatophore, the male counterpart to sperm in the butterfly. And so evidently they must be able to sense these minerals that they need. And in those things you see them puddling, or even if it's on a fresh feces, it's getting the minerals it needs to be able to put that into the egg. So that's the explanation that I've heard. So it's not so much for water as it is for an essential part of reproduction.
Which brings me to the next question that Linda Neighbors has asked, and that was about, what are the water sources for butterflies? Do they drink water, or are they just getting it in the nectar?
Well, I think they're mostly getting it in the nectar, and I think they, probably their conservation of their ability to conserve water is advanced like it is for birds. So do they actually need a water source? I mean, I guess The answer to that is probably no, because just from the natural rainfall and dew that is in the area, that must be sufficient for them.
Yeah. And I
But-
had heard
but-
go ahead.
But at butterfly gardens or, enclosed butterfly places where you can go visit and walk through, they have a lot of pans of water hanging around. And the
Yeah.
butterflies, I wonder whether they are adding some sugar or nutrients to that water, but, it's just lots of them.
That's a good question to ask at the Huntsville Botanical Gardens, where they have a butterfly enclosure. Thanks to Carl Cummins for mentioning that. And they're going to be releasing a new batch of butterflies this Saturday, if anybody wants to travel to Huntsville.
You want to see the zebra swallowtail, go to Huntsville, and that butterfly house they have. When I was there in the fall, there were just dozens and dozens of them. So that was a good place to see them. So the pawpaw, generally that's a forest, inner forest tree. So the zebra, unless you've got a pawpaw tree near the edge, that's why you're not so likely to see them. They tend to be a little deeper into the woods.
We have a question about the Asclepias tuberosa, and I've noticed this too, where you have some growing in your garden, but you never see the larva or the monarchs visiting. Is that like, I wonder why that is. Is that just because are we a little bit out of the main migratory route, or what's happening there? They're just missing my Asclepias tuberosa.
They must be. They must be. We are on the well, we're not on that. Obviously, we're not on that central migratory route, but we are on the eastern migratory route because they come down through the state, and it is known that they are in large numbers there at Fort Morgan and that area. So why don't we see more of them? I can't answer that question. I guess it's got to do with these diminishing numbers.
Yeah, and I had a Girl Scout who was wanting to do a Gold Award project at the garden to put, basically plant a bunch of tuberosa. And I said, well, I've never seen in them on my tuberosa. I think you may need to do a little bit of research and see if maybe there's another host plant or food plant that they're visiting Birmingham for, because maybe they're not actually coming here looking for tuberosa, but maybe this is a stop on their migratory route where they're actually looking for food or minerals, or, I don't know. So what, have you heard anything about that? Like, are there different geographies that are more important for tuberosa versus another plant?
That I don't know. Don't know.
Yeah, well, I never heard from her again, so I guess she didn't figure it out either.
Yeah, David Butler says that he sees zebra swallowtails on the Cahaba River at the National Wildlife Refuge often. So I'm not sure what they're finding there, but they're finding something there. And
I understand that we have pawpaw trees along Shades Creek and Jefferson Park. So that'd be something to watch for if they're coming there to those pawpaw trees.
David has also shared a nice picture, actually, if anybody wants to download that from the chat window.
So you haven't really talked about moths. I think you mentioned it one time. How is their life cycle and everything they do different from the butterflies in general? I know it might be some specifics, but in general, how do they differ?
The moth?
Yes.
Well, I studied the butterflies much more extensively. So, but obviously too, the moth is generally a night creature rather than a daytime creature. It tends to be It does also go through that same metamorphosis cycle, but as to other details like this, I don't.
It really is just, I think, the diurnal nature. I think you're right about that. From
Yeah.
what I remember from my entomology class back in like 2004, they are the same species, Lepidoptera.
Yeah.
But what was interesting, one thing that does stick out in my mind is that it's thought that butterflies evolved from moths. So chicken or the egg, moth or the butterfly, I don't know, but they're the same species. It's just like a diurnal thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I wish I could tell you more about it. I concentrated on the butterfly, and the moth is incidental in that study process, but I didn't go into detail with the moth. So I don't know the answer to your question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
I assume they're quite similar, but as to those details, I can't comment. I don't know.
Were you going to say Judith's question, Michelle?
Yes, yeah, you go ahead.
Okay, sure. So Judith Meyer asks if anyone is noticing swallowtails arriving before August. She's not noticed this in her
Or
yard.
typically in August.
Yeah. Or arriving typically in August, yeah.
The yellow swallowtails are here. I've got a tulip poplar tree just down from my house, and I've been seeing them really since, I would say, since June. I've been seeing them.
Me too.
Or now, there's many more of them now, but I've been seeing them since June.
And usually, yeah.
I've been seeing them in some of the parks, like at Oak Mountain and Harbor River Park. I've seen them around there quite a bit of the summer, I guess, especially recently.
David's mentioning that the zebra swallowtail is basically the critter of the week on the Cahaba. They've been seeing them a lot. That's awesome.
I'm very glad about that. Yeah, I have not seen any monarchs this year, but I have seen swallowtails and some of the other varieties. And we have a garden over in the senior center, which is in West Homewood. And when I was over there this evening, I saw several different kinds of butterflies on the zinnias that are growing in the garden. So I was really pleased about that.
That's great.
In my yard, I mostly see the yellow swallowtails. I do see many Gulf fritillaries, and they use the passion flower as their host plant. I don't see the passion flowers, but I see a lot of the Gulf fritillaries. And then the sulfurs, the yellows, I see a good many of the cloudwood sulfurs as well. So, you know, but they're so visible, they catch your eye because of that flash of color.
So Richard Mills, who is in Asheville, North Carolina, he says we have several common swamp and butterfly weed plants, but they have yet to see a monarch, and they haven't seen their eggs or their larvae this year. So, Richard, have you seen them before this year?
Richard Mills, have you seen them?
Yes, we have had them in previous years, and you know, this year we've got an abundance of milkweed, of at least 4 different species of milkweed, but so far we haven't seen any evidence that the monarchs are utilizing them. Other butterflies, the fritillaries, the swallowtails, we see those fairly abundantly, but have not yet seen a monarch.
There's some other research that suggests that the monarch butterfly has a sort of parasite that is infecting it as well. Kind of the same idea of what happens with bees and hives about these parasites that may be present. So as to what the incidence of that is and how much that's affecting the populations, as to why we're not seeing them, and why here we've got all these host plants that we've been talking about and we're not seeing them? Is that part of the effect as well?
We need a good student at Samford or Birmingham Southern to do a study on that.
Yeah.
Chris Underwood, you have your hand raised. Would you like to ask a question?
I just did, Amy, about the tuberosa.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so Chris had asked the question earlier that we're still sort of talking about with why we're not seeing them on the milkweed that we planted, because everybody tells us the plant milkweed, but we don't see it helping. And I know a lot of people who will purchase the eggs and grow the monarchs themselves to release them, and it just seems like, well, that's interesting. If we're planting the plants, like you said, if you plant it, they should come. So I hope somebody does do a study on that.
I know that they are doing more studies about butterflies, and my daughter is in Flagstaff and she works for U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And the way they have their office set up, they have different endangered species and they give different employees leads. And so my daughter's actually the lead with the monarch in that area.
Wow.
Yeah, so she's shown me some pictures. I don't know if you've seen this, Rick, or not, but they have found these little teeny tiny little stickers that they can put on a monarch butterfly so they can track them better now than they used. Before they really couldn't even tell where they were going, but that's how they've been able to tell a little bit more about their migrations. But I thought it was really interesting to see these teeny tiny little stickers. They they tag birds, they monarch butterflies.
Hmm.
So one of the strangest things I've seen related to the butterflies is at Verna Gates's house. So to set the stage, she's got a lot of plants in the front yard. And then her house, the walls of her outside walls of her house are stone. And so they're not the smooth river stone like you see some houses veneer covered in, but they are rough stone stacked up from the ground to the eaves. And each year, the caterpillars make their way to those stones and climb up them and make their chrysalis all over those walls, from the floor, from the ground all the way up to the eaves. And there's hundreds of them. And so it's amazing to see that and to see all those chrysalis. And you would think that they would do that on the plants out in the front yard or in the yard, but they use the wall of her house as their place to make their chrysalis.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Oh, but I did think of one more question about the monarchs.
Okay.
Do they eat on the milkweed plants as well as use them for host? Will they visit it?
Yes. Well, of course, the main use of the plant is for the caterpillar to eat and grow. But the adult butterfly does come to the plant for nectar, comes to the flowers for nectar. Many, many different butterflies do come to the plants for nectar, but the monarch is the only one that uses it as a host plant. But many do as far as the nectar source is concerned.
Okay, thank you. I'm here.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thanks.
Some of you may have seen the little short video that I've shown. I was out at Red Mountain Park and I had seen at the butterfly habitats like the Botanical Gardens in Huntsville, I'd seen the staff walk over to a butterfly that was basically drinking water or whatever, and they would wet their finger and put it up under the front of the butterfly, just like you would do with a canary or a bird like that. And the butterfly jumped onto their finger and they walked around and showed it to people. And so I have done that several times with wild butterflies. And I did it one time at a Red Mountain Park, and it grabbed onto my finger and I could feel the feet holding on to the end of my finger, and could feel the proboscis, and it worked its way up to my knuckles. And finally I had to start walking along, because we're talking about a long time that it was on my finger, and it stayed on my finger doing that, working its way up all the way to the parking lot. And finally at the parking lot I had to get in my car, and it flew away. And so it's very interesting. It worked its way up my finger, and I assume it was getting the nutrients or getting some kind of, maybe the sweat or whatever. But I encourage you to try that, and to lick your finger if you don't have a water bottle with you or some source of water. I've done it by just licking my finger and making it wet. Of course, some of them are going to be flittering around and not going to calm down enough for you to put your finger up under their mouth parts. But oftentimes they will jump onto your finger, and you can just carry them around or look at them close. So I encourage you to try that. It's a very interesting experience.
Thanks, James. We have a message from Judy. She says, FYI, I have noticed that the one plant that attracts the most butterflies, and she names several, including skippers and swallowtail, is in her yard, and it's a Miss Huff lantana. Have you noticed them to be a good plant, Rick, for butterflies?
Yes, yes. The Miss Huff, of course, can be a monster plant. It gets so big after you've had it for a while. But the lantana is popular with the butterflies. It's a smaller flower, so those that have that shorter proboscis are the ones that favor it.
All right. Do we have any other questions or comments for Rick tonight? Well,
Michelle?
yes, yeah, Richard.
Several of the non-native plants that are very attractive to butterflies are almost like Coca-Cola and I don't know, the kinds of things that we love to eat, but that are not good for us, and that they take the place of the native things that the butterflies actually require. And so I'm not certain about lantana, but it is a non-native, and yes, it's very attractive to butterflies, but somebody might want to look into its value as a food source for butterflies, because if they're feeding on lantana and not getting what they need from the natural native plants, that could actually be harmful rather than beneficial.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, we haven't thought about that, but that's a really good point. That's a lot of our non-natives could be taking the place and not be good for them. So more research. Here's another research project for somebody. All right. Anybody else have anything to add or ask? Well,
speaking of research, there's a couple of articles I've read. One of them, they took some butterflies that they had raised for this purpose, so it wasn't like taking some out of the natural environment. And the researchers were wondering whether the butterflies needed all four of those wings. And so they started clipping a little bit off of the rear wings and see how they did. And then they would clip a little bit more. And finally, they determined that the butterflies did not need those rear wings. They flew just fine, except that they were not as flittery. In other words, they were not able to really make sharp turns and stay away from predators like birds as much. But as far as the actual flying ability, was fine with just the two front wings. They just couldn't maneuver as well. And then the other research piece that I read several years ago, they had scientists had assumed that nothing was passed on from the caterpillar to the butterfly. Basically, if you want to think of it mentally, because in the caterpillar and the chrysalis, it just becomes a mush, and then out of that mush, basically becomes a butterfly, grows a butterfly. And so what they did was they did, so like Pavlov's dogs, they trained some caterpillars, and these were moth caterpillars, to respond to a little bit of a tiny electrical shock. And so the moths learned to avoid whatever, the learning part of it. Then as they became butterflies and they did the same experiment, and the butterflies knew that learning and had that learning from when there was a caterpillar. So the scientists were amazed that something like that was passed on. But when you think about the generations that are migrating, and through those generations, that their knowledge of where to go in their migration has to be passed on, and it has to be passed on basically from the egg and the caterpillar onto the butterfly. So very interesting, some science that's going on there.
Very true. Very interesting topics. So anyone else have anything? Well, again, Rick, thank you so much for sharing your information and everything you know about butterflies. It's been very enlightening and really helped us key into some of the plants that are beneficial for different butterflies. And I've gotten a lot of information about, what I can plant in my garden that will help butterflies. So I hope other people have been able to get that too. And we want to thank everyone who attended tonight. Thank you for being here. And remember that we'll be meeting in September, this second Thursday in September. And we'll let you know about that program at a later date. But that will be our anniversary birthday party. So we'll be doing some special things for that. So once again, thanks. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
And thank you,
Thank
Amy.
you so much.
Enjoyed the program very much.
I did too.
I did too.
It's very interesting. And I love your pictures too, Rick.
Thank you.
This last one that you have, the painting is just gorgeous.
Well, this is my friend Walt Costello, and he is a lifelong watercolor artist.
Oh,
And he just does beautiful work. So he just took my photograph and produced this.
turned it into a watercolor. It's gorgeous.
Yes, yes.
Really, really beautiful. Well, I hope this was beneficial for you tonight to do this program with us. I hope you get other people asking you for your program, because it's really beneficial, and I think it's important for our area to know more about butterflies. We do have butterflies, and we just need to know more about attracting them.
Yes. Yeah, maybe we'll have more, gather more information about why we aren't seeing the monarchs.
Yeah.
In years past, there's just only been a small window of time during the summer that we've seen them. So we must not have a very much of a native population of monarchs. It might be that they're just passing through, and who knows?
I know. We just need more information about it. And from what I've read, it's just really hard to get information about them because it's not like birds where you can band them. That's difficult to put anything on them, and then they are changing so quickly. You can't really keep track of just individuals.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, they don't live long. And
They don't live long, so it's not like a bird where you can band them and then you can see them migrate and see where they go in the spring and where they go in the winter, because they don't live as long.
yes. Okay.
Doesn't it take them like 5 generations to make like a complete trip from north to south and back?
Well, that group that winters in Mexico and then gets to the northern plains, it's estimated that takes 10 to 14 generations for them to get that far. So, I mean, it's an incredible process when you think about it, that within that butterfly, that caterpillar, that information is passed through it to create this. It's quite a stunning phenomenon, the migration of a butterfly.
Well, thanks again. And I think Amy's left. Amy, are you still out there? I think she left, but she was instrumental in getting this program set up, and she knows you from gardening, Rick, and just I want to thank her. I'll send her a note later. But,
Okay, I'm going to take off this sharing and
okay,
okay.
and there you are. Well, good night, and thank you again. And you did send me your address.
Yeah, I did.
Yes, I see it. So I'm going to write that down, and we'll get you a check.
Okay, I'm going to
Let's
sign
begin.
off.
Okay. Good night. Good night, everyone.